Good morning, everybody. How are we doing today? Welcome to the Jazz Shepherd YouTube channel. For those of you who are new to this channel, we talk jazz, pressings, vinyl, history. It's all part of the stew that we like to concoct here on a regular basis. I have a little small coffee shop here, I have a small coffee shop here in a small town in America, and it's interesting, as I've been open for almost 5 months now, seeing how things have developed. And we've certainly had some brilliant moments and some exciting things happen, including making the local news, the local papers, the Twin Cities newspaper. I mean, we're getting a lot of good press and good media, great reviews online. But again, there's still not that local support that I would hope for. And it's not to say I'm not getting a lot of local support, I am. But it's definitely from a slanted political landscape. But, I mean, I am excited about the future and starting the Afrobeat Reggae Night on Saturdays. It's going to bring a diverse crowd to this little town, and it's going to challenge some of the American conventions. And I'm kind of excited about it. Part of me is hesitant. Part of me is also excited. And I don't want to speak negative about it because I believe it's going to be fine. You know, our last episode, I think I had some kind of fears and apprehensions and some stuff that me and my wife talked about. But I've talked with a few other locals and stuff, and I mean, people are going to complain no matter what you do. And I think for the most part, no small town's going to want to be behind a bunch of racist bigotry. And so I think we'll be all right. I just want to let people know that because some of the comments, I think I must have come off a little bit too, I don't want to say militant, but like ready for a fight. And I suppose at some level that is the case, but I think we'll be all right. But today we're going to talk about a new tone poet that came out. I listened to it probably 4 times yesterday. It's great cafe music for one reason. 2, I wanted to talk about today a little bit. And 3, it's just one of my favorite artists. And it's the great Stanley Turrentine, Mr. Natural. And again, wonderful, beautiful packaging. You can see the reflection of the wonderful gatefold, the great images inside, taken by Frank Wolf. Fantastic session. Bob Cranshaw's on the bass, Elvin Jones on the drums, McCoy Tyner on the piano, and of course Stanley Turrentine's on the sax, with the great young Lee Morgan on the trumpet. And Lee Morgan has just kind of returned from his exile. I won't call it exile's the wrong word. But he was kind of off the grid for a little bit. Drug problems, I think, was part of that. He went to VJ for a while. But he's making his return to Blue Note now in 63 and making Sidewinder and having some pretty good success with what he's doing. And he's a bit more commercially appealing now than he was prior to leaving for VJ and his self-imposed exile for a while. His early 6 albums at Blue Note are fairly charged, hard bop, and aggressive, and tangibly on the forefront of the hard bop movement and scene, and even the civil rights movement. They feel very charged at times. This later Lee Morgan is a little bit calmer, it feels like, a little bit more centered, but he still brings a pretty hard edge to this session. Stanley's a pretty creamy player, in the ilk of a Ben Webster, Coleman Hawkins, you know what I mean? So he plays with a lot of cream, a lot of blues, a lot of gospel, a lot of feeling. Stanley is one of the real progenitors of the soul jazz movement in a lot of ways. Guys like him and Lou Donaldson brought in that conga and that Latin feel, and I believe Ray Barretto's on this as well. And Ray Barretto right there, which I don't think he was pictured inside, which probably isn't that uncommon. Because the Congo player was always kind of considered like an add-on, a condiment on some level. But again, wonderful job by the team at Tone Poet with the old, beautiful covers. This session, I believe, was not issued until much later, if at all, even though it was recorded in 64 in September. And that 64 is a connection to a couple of the songs on here, in particular, Can't Buy Me Love, which the Beatles probably have had a huge success with in the previous 6 months. And of course, it wasn't their song. I mean, who did do Can't Buy Me Love? Was it Bo Diddley or boy, I can almost picture it. I almost hear it, the original. It wasn't a Beatles song. The Beatles had a big success with it, and it put it on the tongues and the hands and the players of many people across the music scene. And if I remember, it was a black musician who wrote Cameo. I could be wrong. I better look. I stand corrected. It was a Beatle Lennon McCartney song, apparently, which I did not recall that being a Beatles song. I mean, I knew they did it and had huge success with it, but I thought that was somebody else that they were covering. And those early Beatles records are filled with covers. But anyway, that being said, it's a wonderful, laid-back, soul jazz, early in that movement. It's, again, Lee does bring a little edge to it, but it's not the aggressively that we know from his hard bop days. It's a bit more within the realm and the scope of the rest of the group. McCoy and Elvin are probably still with Coltrane at this point, but they're both kind of itching to get beyond the limitations of the Coltrane Quartet at that point. And the Coltrane Quartet slowly morphing into a quintet and a sextet with extra bass players and extra saxophone players, Pharoah Saunders and his honking. And I think for guys like Tyner and Elvin Jones, I mean, Jones was a Detroit guy. He came from a lot of lineage of the blues and the black church, and I think he loved Coltrane dearly. I mean, don't mistake that whatsoever. He loved Coltrane dearly, but sometimes your bandmate's vision and quest doesn't always match your own. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with saying that. They also do My Girl Is Just Enough Woman for Me. Fantastic. The song called Tacos, who I don't remember the lineage of that song either. But also on here is Wahoo, a.k.a. Stanley's Tune. And Wahoo was a song written by the great Duke Pearson, who was a Blue Note A&R guy. He's making records of his own at Blue Note. Pearson's early work is really beautiful. And then he starts making bigger compositions as an arranger and producer in 64, 65 at Blue Note himself. And Wahoo's a great record. And Stanley Turrentine might even be on Wahoo. I can't recall. I'm going to look. So here's Wahoo, Duke Pearson. Similar era, probably 64. I'm going to guess on that. Well, it doesn't list it like the new ones do, sadly. But anyway, it's got James Spaulding on it, not Stanley Turrentine. Joe Henderson's also on it. And it's probably Henderson's playing that made me think of Stanley Turrentine. Henderson can be very lyrical and very beautiful and soulful, like Stan the Man can. It's interesting they have a.k.a. Stanley's Blues here after Wahoo. Wonder why they would tribute it that way. Let's read. It says, consider Duke Pearson's Wahoo. True, it is a bit modal, yet it is also a blues with the feel of any, say, Coming Home Baby or a work song. And Stanley's first solo course is a bit harmonically lean, considering the backup of Tyner and Jones, who helped John Coltrane cut a Love Supreme 3 months later in the same studio. Yet by the second chorus, he moves into some R&B tinged plaints. R&B tinged plaints. I've never heard that word before. With Barretto's conga and a helpful ballast. And by the next tune, Stanley's dedication to his then wife, organist Shirley Scott, he sounds even more himself, seemingly less fettered by more conventional changes. So anyway, interesting stuff. Beautiful record. It shows Blue Note and where Blue Note's at in 1964. And, I mean, you can really trace most of the developments in jazz. At each label, you can see those transitions happening. You know, and it's not like what happens at Blue Note. It's not being replicated at Prestige and Riverside and Impulse. And, like, a lot of the developments in jazz are happening across the board. And some labels are a bit quicker to graft onto it. Others are a little bit more hesitant. But all the same, it's a fantastic session by a great artist who Turrentine recorded a lot for Blue Note. I mean, he's got probably 25 records at Blue Note, ballpark. And a number of his albums didn't get issued initially, in part because of how much he recorded. But a lot of Turrentine stuff is starting to surface and has surfaced in Japan over the years. And I think he's an underappreciated guy at Blue Note. And again, his records sold pretty well, which always seems to kind of hurt people's impression of a guy's career. Oh, his records aren't that hard to find. They're not that expensive. You can't be that good. And it's kind of the backwards way of looking at it. I mean, the guy sold a lot of records for Blue Note compared to some of the artists on Blue Note, especially, you know. And Blue Note, it's a relative thing. Blue Note sales never touched what a poor-selling Columbia record could do. I mean, just your distribution channels are so different. It's like a small little coffee shop like me serving 100 coffees in a week versus what Starbucks does across the nation. That's the difference between Blue Note and Columbia. It's a vastly different enterprise. And so being at those big labels was good for the bottom end, but it did also compromise some of your artistic creativity and freedom. So being at Blue Note was a great place for musicians to be. You're working with some of the best talent in the industry. Most of it's like-minded. Most of it's there because they want to make great art without compromise. And that's one of the things about Blue Note that's so unique, is that the artistic credibility is so high, so consistently. And the compromise is nil. The softer titles meant just to collect revenues don't exist. And so Blue Note sessions after Blue Note sessions, it's just a quality black experience filled with the black church, filled with the rhythm and blues, filled with soul, filled with the roots of bebop and hard bop, the elements of the swing era. I mean, all that stuff is echoed in what Blue Note's doing. It just comes out with that new modern sound at the time. Again, it's nice to talk about Blue Note once in a while because their legacy is so incredible, and it's become a bit of an echo chamber out there today. I think 4 or 5 years ago when I started this channel, there were certain opinions that it was fairly unique what I was saying. But I think enough people have kind of caught on to what I was saying that some of that Blue Note mythology has solidified, and the understanding and the reasonings of it does seem to have changed. I feel like I've done a lot to service people collecting Bethlehem, the Savoy label. I think just looking at labels in general as a way to look at jazz is something that this channel has been very instrumental in promoting. So it's a great way to learn the canon. It's a great way to discover new artists by collecting labels. It's also a great way to understand the chronology and the fits and starts, the little bits of incremental innovation that happens here and there, and the allowances of each label's corporate structure that will either fetter or unchain an artist's desires. And so, as much credit as Miles gets, going to Columbia does change his course. And it makes him a model of jazz nationwide, where he's become a very big public figure and is the ambassador for the genre in a lot of ways. But had Miles' path been different, and say he had re-signed with Blue Note in 1955, and was recording with Hank Mobley's and Art Blakey's, we'd have a very different Miles Davis canon to go through. I don't think it's something that's really understood, how much Miles had to consider his contract and redeeming that contract in the eyes of his payers in order to justify that money coming in and to maintain credibility with his next contract. I mean, you can't just make artistic one-offs that don't sell and think that they're going to keep paying you. And so there's a lot of contemplation on an artist's part. And part of what governs that is your artistic demands, but also your lifestyle and the amount of children you have. Wes Montgomery, part of his reason to go to Verve was he had a lot of mouths to feed, a lot of kids. You know, so there's different considerations at play. A wife wanting a home in the suburbs versus a single guy who's just trying to get his fix.